I want to tell you a little bit about Pam. She has a master's degree. She's certified as a prevention specialist, and that's where I first met Pam, was many years ago when we both worked at what used to be the Prevention Resource Center, and it's now Prevention First. Both of us worked there, and we did a lot of fun, interesting, and I think early meaningful work that's led us to where we are today. Pam is a Chicago-based author. She develops wonderful curriculum, and she's a consultant. She's my consultant in this, dedicated to increasing resiliency and capacities of individuals, of the families, of the communities they live in, the organizations that they're part of, and looking at the systems of care across our state. Pam started studying and writing about stigma toward behavioral health conditions at the turn of the century. When I thought about doing something with stigma, as far as a webinar, Pam was the first person that popped into my mind because she's had a lot of experience in writing about stigma in many different areas and focus. She's found an understanding of stigma and discrimination to be an essential component of the other areas of the focus of her work. And that includes resilience, stress, trauma, issues of health equity, and public health approaches to behavioral health. And along with her many other manuals and her articles and her monographs and her booklets and her books, which are wonderful, and I have many of, Pam is also the author of 2 self-study and discussion guides on stigma. I have those too, it's somewhere in all my stack of many things. And that's Healing the Stigma of Addiction, a guide for treatment professionals, and Healing the Stigma of Depression, a guide for helping professionals. And with that, I'm going to introduce Pam, who's one of my longtime co-worker friends that I have absolute respect for, and you will enjoy today. Pam, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nancy. And Nancy befriended me back when I was brand new in the field. And I can't even begin to imagine how much I grew as a result of our collaboration on a number of things. I'd like to do a couple of technical things before we get started. There were going to be 2, but now there's 3. Somebody in another unit seems to be drilling on something. I hope that it's not audible to you, and if it is, I sincerely apologize. Bless you. And I reassure you that I am not drilling on your teeth. The second announcement is that because of my particular computer, I have the microphone in one place, the camera in another place, the screen in another place. So sometimes I'm going to be looking in different parts of the screen. Sometimes it's going to look like I'm looking at your belly button, and I'm not. But forgive me for that. And the third thing is that a few weeks ago, I had one of my 2 front teeth taken out, and it's going to be another couple weeks before they can put anything in there. So that's that. I didn't do that on purpose, just to amuse you, but I hope it does. So that's about the only technical announcements. I'd been in the field about maybe 10 years before I started studying and writing about stigma. Oh, also with this tooth, I have a slight lisp as well. So I choose my subjects that have a lot of S's in them, because that takes full advantage of it. Nancy mentioned that it was about the turn of the century that I started working on stigma. She didn't mention which century, and I'd like to clarify that. It was the 21st century. I had been working for Prevention First at first and then for a few years as a consultant. And a lot of my work had been focused on shame, but nobody at that point really was talking about stigma. Shame became kind of a core of a lot of the work that we did. Then I started doing some consulting for the Great Lakes Addiction Technology Transfer Center when it was at UIC under Lynetta Albright. And I finally had a chance to write a manual called Healing the Stigma of Addiction. And at the time, Great Lakes shared an office with the Midwest AIDS Training and Education Center, or MATEC. And I had a chance to collaborate a little bit with one of their employees, a brilliant and gracious and lovely lady named Reggie Martyr. Reggie, unbeknownst to me and most of the people who knew her, had a very serious depressive disorder. I never knew. Most of the staff, most of her friends never knew, because she had so much shame about it. She didn't want anybody to know. Maybe her best friend and her family, that was pretty much it. And then suddenly found out that she had taken her life and she was gone. No, and then the stuff started coming out about what had happened. So I went to the funeral, and people who love Reggie just filled the synagogue. We were sitting in every available inch of the sanctuary. People were outside, down the steps, down the street in both directions, because there wasn't enough room to get in. So many people. And I kept thinking, what if some of these people had known that she was struggling so hard and it was such a life and death struggle? What if, it sounds silly, but what if half of those people had been praying for her? Or, she was struggling with her medications, if you've ever had a depressive disorder or worked with people or known people with depressive disorders, you don't find the right medication combination at first necessarily. You have to keep trying. You have to keep going off of this, and then you can go on that. She was struggling. She could have had a stronger thing of support around her, but she was the strong one, right? She was the one who had the perfect husband and the perfect kids and the perfect house, and everything was wonderful and beautiful. Her whole family, after she died, believed that she had died of stigma, and so did we. So with the family's blessing, MATEC and the Great Lakes sponsored another manual called Healing the Stigma of Depression. And this was dedicated to Reggie, and I had the joy of writing it. And I could feel Reggie in my head telling me what to say pretty much the whole time. And Nancy is going to figure out how to post those manuals on their website, if I can talk her into it, so that you would have access to those PDFs. But I will never forget that stigma kills. So let's start out by looking at our understanding of stigma, because my guess is we all have a lot of experience of stigma. Some of that experience is really painful, and we want to make sure we're kind of on the same page. So what is stigma? When it comes to substance use disorders, mental health conditions, how does stigma show up in life? First of all, why is that lady looking at us like that? Is she stigmatizing us? I'd like to, I'm going to turn off the share for a minute, and I'd like to just sort of invite people to talk about what stigma is and how it shows up. Obviously, the term wasn't new when you first saw this description of this webinar. So I'd like you to talk a little bit, and I'm going to do this from time to time. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to us, because this is where the richness of the information comes in. So you don't have to raise your hand. You can just because you can just talk. Is that okay, Nancy, if people just kind of blurt it out? Okay, she's nodding her head. So you will have to unmute when you do this, but I want to get some examples of stigma or definitions. Just throw anything in that you want.
Discrimination.
Discrimination. Stigma leads to discrimination. Absolutely. Thank you.
Shame.
Shame. Definitely. And stigma is wound around shame, isn't it?
Beliefs.
Fear.
Fear. Yes. Fear is a huge motivator for stigma. And stigma causes fear.
Thought I'd look up the definition, and it says a mark of disgrace associated with a particular person or situation, like disgrace. Yeah, like
Yes.
Sharon was putting in the chat. I was like, yeah, whoa.
Yeah. And it originally the word stigma was, I forget whether it's Greek, probably Greek, for stain. It also meant stain. So yeah, a mark of disgrace. Irving Goffman was like the godfather of stigma. He was a sociologist, and he wrote extensively on stigma, and he brought out the word origins and everything too, and talked about it a lot. Who else? Examples of stigma.
I think there's a sense of sadness that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah, sadness. I hadn't thought of it, but there are losses, right? There are losses connected to bearing a mark of disgrace. What are some of the things that are lost?
It could be fellowship, like if you're in a faith community that believes or say they don't believe, but in shunning and stuff, you may lose friends and family over situations.
Yes.
And
Yeah, shunning.
Yeah.
Along with that, say isolation goes along with that.
Yes. Definitely isolation. You know, and traditionally we would think, oh, the way you help somebody who has a substance use disorder or something else that is bad behavior, end quote, is you shame them and you isolate them. Boy, and shame and isolation works really well on addiction, doesn't it? It's just the exact opposite of what is going to help.
Along with what Kelly said, if you're in a faith-based community, sometimes judgment. Well, why aren't you praying hard enough about this?
Yeah. Judgment linked to simplistic ideas of what's going to help. Or what is the answer? What is the center of the problem? If it was just a spiritual problem, you know, but it's wound around the neurobiology, the other physical things. Yeah.
Stigma can make a person isolate, but also their mental disorder or their substance use disorder worse, because then they do not want to seek treatment.
Yep.
Because the stigma is going to get worse.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Huge loss of any sense of self-esteem or identity.
Yep.
That, yeah, again, a lot of folks said that's isolating, but also the feeling that you're not worthy of reaching out or of connecting.
Right. You're not worthy of reaching out. You're not worthy of connecting. And you're certainly not worthy of getting well. You know, save the treatment for people who can be saved and who deserve it. You got to earn your help by being well. It's crazy the way we think of it, isn't it? I mean, as a species, I don't mean us in this room.
I think too that all that boils down to the fear of judgment.
Yeah.
I think it's got a lot to do with the understanding of things as well, that a lot of people do not. It's not that they don't look into understanding. They've not lived it personally, so it's harder for them to understand. So instead of fully opening their mind, because they don't want anything to do with it, with addiction in any way, they just go ahead and write it off and would rather say the words that they would rather say instead of even researching into just the smallest bit to be able to have a better vocabulary for, say, to people just in the community, to make them feel more comfortable so they know that they can reach out for help. So
Yeah.
I think that's a large thing. It's one of the biggest hangups that you see.
I think so too. And it's not like they don't hear people in public service announcements or in speeches or in, anything saying addiction isn't a disease, or mental health conditions are illnesses. It's not like they don't hear that, but they can't let it in. Afraid of judgment, afraid of letting go of their own judgment of others.
Absolutely. And that's stigma against them as well in return. But as a recovering addict myself, with almost 10 years sober, that was one of the hardest things for me to understand as well, to convince myself and to truly realize that it is a disease, because I constantly would bother myself as well. You're just not strong enough, and that's not the case. But whenever somebody does not want to take the time to truly dig into it and look, then they don't understand the stigma part.
Yeah. Yeah. I know a lady even older than I am, whose daughter has a number of mental health conditions and a substance use disorder in remission. She's in recovery, and she keeps trying to get her mother to understand about the illness, because her mother kind of drinks a lot too, and she probably is affected. I can't say whether she's alcoholic or not, but she has some behavioral problems when she's in her cups. But she absolutely will not let in that information.
A little bit of narcissism.
Just a
Possibly.
little.
Just a little bit. I understand that absolutely. My grandmother is more understanding than anybody in my entire family, and my mother is the first one to point fingers, but don't realize that she may have a few pointing back at her. But that's okay. All we can do is keep going.
Yes. Anybody else?
It separates you from the community.
Yeah,
You don't belong.
you don't belong. And what happens when we don't belong?
The isolation can kill.
Yeah.
I was gonna say projected anger, when people, sometimes it causes you to project your frustrations, your hurt, your pain, your shame onto others. And so it's misdirected. That's the word I wanted to use, misdirected.
Yes. Yes, definitely. We have the pain and shame about ourselves. And so if we can find it in somebody else, feel safer.
I was gonna say it's somebody knocked on my door, so I might have missed something, but I think from what I've been hearing, it could go with the fear of people, because we don't like change as a whole, I don't think. So when you find out something new from somebody, they no longer fit the neat little package you thought they were. And then that's kind of scary, because then they may learn something about you that you didn't have showing outside of your neat little package. So
Yes.
I think that sometimes.
Yes,
That's why we don't get to know some people. It's because you don't, want to acknowledge they've changed.
yes. Excellent point. Okay, I will share my screen again for a minute. So we've got the stigmatizing lady there. It shows up, often stigma shows up in a belief that these conditions are signs of moral or mental weakness, signs of corruption, inferiority, all of those things. And they're very primitive ideas, right? And they've evolved over time, only in some people's heads they haven't evolved. Somebody mentioned discrimination, definitely prejudice against the individual and the family, and discriminatory policies, discriminatory ways of treating people. And you don't see in the stigma a whole lot of room for a belief that people can get well, that people can really recover, or the value of their recovery. We want to punish people who have these conditions, particularly, how do we punish people? Through shaming and scorn and derision and, othering people. I love that word. It's been started to be used, othering, because it describes so much what happens in human relationships, avoidance. And then there's always internalized stigma. Somebody talked about the shame, the guilt, the isolation, the resistance. I don't deserve help. I don't have any hope. Why should God help me or even care about me? What about internalized family stigma? The family, what does the family say about what's going on in the family? Anybody? There's a lot of pain in the family. Does everybody talk about that? Is that something that you feel okay talking to your friends about? Possibly not. Silence that, Claudia Black wrote a book many years ago called The Secret Nobody Knows, or The Secret That Everyone Knows, excuse me. And that's a lot of the isolation. I can't have my friends over because of what's happening at home. And in society, stigma shows up as systems and policies and professional decisions that make it harder for people to get help, harder to find help, harder to afford help. We're not going to fund Medicaid for addictive disorders or mental health conditions or something, and harder to be treated with respect when they do get services. So we have objectives for this, why the stigma is so destructive, why it's so hard to get rid of it, 3 major approaches to reducing stigma and how well they work, and a couple of strategies that can be used to heal the stigma, and strategies that can be used to heal internalized stigma, used within organizations, community partner organizations, through public education, and by addressing discriminatory policies and practices. So why am I saying heal the stigma instead of, eliminate the stigma, nuke the stigma? It's that old thing about, we can't fight the darkness by throwing more darkness at it. We have to turn on the light. We fight hate with hate, and guess what? We've got more hate. So we can't nuke the stigmatizers because they are us. We can't just pull the stigma out by the roots because it's our roots, right? So that's why I write things about healing the stigma rather than fighting the stigma. And, you know, why is the stigma so powerful, even though information has started to has been filtering into the population for a long time? And, you know, they've had movies about addiction and recovery and treatment and stuff. And there have been tons of public education messages. Why is it still so powerful? To figure that out, we have to start deep in the primitive parts of the brain. Way inside the brain, some very primitive, very powerful parts of the human psyche still believe that we might get attacked by predators, right? This is the old survival brain. There's not enough to go around. And, you know, there are very sophisticated parts of our brain are wired to show us differences and make us notice differences and make us notice differences first and make us perceive people who are different as threats to us. And then there are parts of the brain that are still terrified about our own imperfections, like one lady was saying, our own vulnerabilities. We don't like that. And we don't like anybody who reminds us that we're vulnerable. So we don't like that. So here, I don't know if you can see the captions on these things. You got a couple of polar bears. By the way, if you're not muted and you're making sounds and stuff, could you mute yourself? Appreciate it. Thank you. If you're like chewing or putting things away and having a lot of background noise and you're not muted. Okay, so we got a couple of polar bears who are biting into this.
Pamela's on mute.
Yeah, I don't think I when I'm sharing my screen, I don't think I have an option to mute myself. Anyway, okay. So anyway, the polar bear is eating the thing, and he's saying to the other polar bear, "Oh, hey, I just love these things. Crunchy on the outside and a chewy center." But how did we learn to escape predators, right? Because I think to understand stigma, we have to look at the primitive ways that mammals have learned to survive, you know, and we survive together, right? We survive in the pack, in families, in workplaces, in professional fields, in communities, in cultures, in societies. That's our pack, right? And we're more complicated than when we were just running around trying to get away from lions and tigers and bears, oh my. But, okay, let's see. But in this pack, we still survive because we love and we are loved. We survive because we belong, because we take care of one another. We fight off threats together. And if we think there's not enough to go around, we're going to compete for what there is by defeating somebody else. Our brains learn to identify differences. We've talked about that. Our brains learn to avoid contagion by identifying weaknesses, defects, and illnesses. And we're kind of programmed to be put off of people who seem to have defects and illnesses. You know. And so we do this kind of primitive dance of acceptance and rejection. We have a long history of shunning. Somebody mentioned shunning, kicking out members of the pack who might spread illness, might not be able to keep up with the pack when we're being pursued. And here's the important part, that's all connected with that old survival brain. The ancient, primitive, powerful, the old survival linked things in the brainstem and in the limbic system are way more powerful than that higher brain that's out there listening to the public education messages and going to the trainings and stuff like that. The older and the more linked to survival a brain structure is, the more powerful it is, and the more it gets to call the shots. So I don't know if you can see, the one little egg is carrying a sign that says, pick him. What's happening in the higher brain? The higher brain thinks it's in charge. And when the higher brain is capable of morality, spirituality, reason, stuff like that, doesn't always put them to a higher use. Most of the time, the primitive brain is using the higher brain to figure out how to get away with the stuff that the primitive brain wants to do. And the higher brain is really good at helping with that. Been reading this wonderful guy, Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, talking about morality. And he talks about the elephant and the rider, that the primitive brain is the elephant. And we think that, and the higher brain is the rider sitting on top of the elephant. The elephant's going to go where the elephant wants to go, right? And the higher brain has also been trained by centuries worth of long traditions where we've shamed people to try to help them change. And even if we've noticed that doesn't work too well, the primitive brain is still calling the shots. It's afraid, as people were saying. So when people have let us down, with yet again more symptoms of their illnesses, we may understand their symptoms, their illnesses, but it feels like righteous indignation feels good. And we can distance ourselves. We're less imperfect, so we're safer, according to the survival brain. And what if there are multiple stigmatized conditions? It's not, the behavioral health conditions are not isolated in a human being. They're mixed in with all kinds of other things. And there can be process addictions. How many people have gotten in recovery for addiction and found out that there's a bunch of stuff that pops up after that? We stigmatize people who have been incarcerated. We stigmatize their families. We stigmatize people of color, particularly people with darker skin and large Black men. We stigmatize people with disabilities, whether those are physical or intellectual disabilities, people with low incomes, people who have lost their homes, people who are living homeless, who have been evicted, foreclosed on. We have stigmatized LGBTQI people. We even stigmatize women and girls in a lot of cultures. In most cultures, in some more than others, we stigmatize immigrants and refugees, or people of whatever religion we consider other. And in each case, it's the primitive parts of the brain focusing on the differences. So if a person or a family has more than one stigmatized condition or characteristic, what happens then? Is the whole equal to the sum of its parts? Or is the whole by any chance bigger than the sum of its parts? So self-stigma, if you spend a lot of time around people who are judging you, you're going to be more likely to judge yourself. And if you spend a lot of time judging other people, you ever notice that the more you're judging other people, the more you end up judging yourself? You may be judging other people, and I'm saying you, I mean me, right? I may judge other people in order to protect myself from being judged in this crazy primitive way, but I end up judging myself more. It's a spiritual thing, I think. I think it's a spiritual connection between those. So, the external stigma has generated this incredible internalized stigma, keeps people out of getting help, keeps people isolated, keeps people ashamed. You know, I am so sorry, I forgot to turn my little ringy thing off. But you know, Brene Brown talks about shame and the importance of toxic shame, and how shame acts on the body and the mind very much like trauma. And self-stigma is an example of toxic shame. And we experience it very much like we do experience trauma. So in that one, I don't know if you can see the caption, but the guys are hitting somebody with their little bats, and one guy says to the other, "It's some new thing called an intervention." If you're in the field, does that mean we don't have any stigma anymore? We're cured? You know, how many people have heard people in a treatment center have heard employees talking over the water cooler or whatever, using stigmatized terminology? You know, and there's a whole lot of things that are stigmatizing now, that may not have started out feeling stigmatizing. Because there's a couple things. One, hold on. One is that you know, the most commonly used stigmatizing term is substance abuse, and it's not used as commonly anymore. Even DSM has changed it to substance use disorders, you know. But whether or not a word has some inherently judgmental term in it, like abuse, or drunk or rummy or whatever, words can take on toxicity based on the situations they have been used in. And have they been used as an insult? If you use a word as an insult enough, even if it's a benign word to start out with, it gets toxic. And sometimes, you know, people talk about, oh, this is political correctness and all of that, but really, sometimes our terminology just gets so toxic, we have to replace certain terms, because it will never go back. You know, once a pickle is a pickle, it's not going to go back to being a cucumber. So I would like to talk in small groups, and I'd like each member of the small groups, and Nancy very cleverly can divide you into little breakout rooms, and we'll see if that works. We will cross our fingers, eyes, and toes. Worked last time. I'd like each group member to name one characteristic or one condition or one identity that you used to stigmatize other people for, or you used to stigmatize yourself for. I should say or, because, you know, how many people have stigmatized people with addictions a lot and then developed their own addictions, and then like, holy, you know, and tell your group if this is something that you've made progress on not stigmatizing. So I'd like you to think of one thing you used to stigmatize yourself or others for, and that you don't do it so much anymore. And I'd like you to tell your group simply how you were able to heal and overcome that stigma. And if you can't think of one that you've overcome, you could think of one that you have that you are working on keeping yourself from stigmatizing. So that's a little bit of a reaching inside yourself. Don't tell anybody anything that you feel too vulnerable telling them. And please be respectful of the people in your group, and don't say, oh, you stigmatize that. You know, we have to understand we are all works in progress. And even works in progress are not in progress 24 hours a day, right? And we go back and forth. And so please be kind and to one another, and then don't repeat what anybody said. This is a vulnerable topic, and if you don't want to be vulnerable with the truth, make something up. No, just kidding. But does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that assignment? Okay, Nancy?
Okay, welcome back.
All
We're at
right,
about 25 minutes.
sounds good. Okay.
A good 25.
The last part of this is going to be on what the stigma research has suggested that we do about all this if we want to make things better. Let's get a jump on this by, I'd like you to name some of the strategies you talked about, some of the things that have helped us heal our stigma toward people with whatever. You can use the stigma stories in your group. I mean, obviously there won't be time for everybody to tell the same story, but I'd like you to name some things that have helped, in your case, do that. Again, don't reveal anything personal about, that somebody else said, but just some strategies that have been effective. I will start out. My mother did some things in blackouts that were very hurtful, and I definitely stigmatized her for that until I got into recovery, and I was able to realize that she had no choice over, or did not know a choice over whether she went into a blackout, that she was in, and somehow my identification with her powerlessness helped me stop stigmatizing some of her symptoms. So that's just an example, identification with somebody. I like to, again, no need to raise your hand or put it in the chat room or anything. If you can just, just yell it out.
I think that bringing things to the dialogue and just making open conversation is a really, really big one. Instead of just brushing over things, sweeping them under the rug, which is a big thing with stigma, is that a lot of things aren't discussed. They
Yes.
are not talked about. We don't want to talk about that. But no, we need to have conversations about that because it's important to see it, I guess.
Yeah, and you said dialogue, and dialogue is a really important word because the way I've heard it described, it means that everybody's listening to one another too. They're not just saying things, that everybody is listening, that there is an attempt to listen, to take people seriously, and thank you.
I think education is important. I know I've gone through like the NAMI family to family education and domestic violence and things like that. And so a lot of notions or, things that I thought about before after being educated helped a lot to remove that stigma.
Thank you. Yes, education, definitely. What are some other things?
I think the lived experience helped for me.
Yeah, definitely lived experience helps.
I love that it's called that.
Yes,
I love that phrase, lived experience.
yeah, I do too.
For me, some of the things that's helped me is the sharing. Telling it to other people that are going through the same thing that you do, that you've done it. And, that to help me it's not only helped them, but it's also helped me heal a lot.
Yeah. I can see how that would help both the internalized stigma, like she looks like she's got it together, but she went through something similar to me. And it would also help if somebody is trying to understand, those people here as a human being who is one of those people. What else?
I am a woman of faith, and I am a firm believer that God wastes nothing. In all of my experiences with stigma or things like that, He's used them all eventually to
Yes,
help someone else who needs to break free from that same problem.
yes.
Yes. Yeah. My first thing about Reggie, her death led to the creation of a manual of something that would, and what else?
I was saying about when I was kind of growing up, but when you say lived experience, I kind of put it to as you get older and you start to understand things that happened when you was younger, because you don't have that experience and you really don't understand what's going on until you get something happens to you in your later life, and then everything kind of falls into place. Well, so I don't stigmatize people from the past because now I understand. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could put that down to wisdom
Mm,
and synthesis over time
yeah.
of our experiences.
Yeah. And that's why I do like that phrase, the lived experience, because it does put everything into perspective.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And have you ever noticed that when you're in a really intense situation where maybe you are sort of under siege socially or emotionally, you don't get the insights right away.
No.
You need some peace to really process that stuff.
Yeah.
What else? What are some other things that help dispel stigma, heal stigma?
I was going to say becoming an advocate is a huge part. Even if you may be shy or may feel like, you're not a people person, but if you're not doing anything but, posting on social media, you may be able to make someone aware. You may also be able to help brighten someone's day. So you just never know. And an advocate doesn't always have to be a large spokesperson, but an advocate is showing up every day and showing up the way you show up. And so you may not have some of the skills to be a speaker or something like that, or desire, but if you show up, sending a text message, checking on people, and then making people aware that you are here for helping someone. I think that's huge.
I do too. And we think of advocacy, our field does not have its roots in advocacy, right? Even recovery has its roots in anonymous programs. And the idea SAMHSA did a push, starting in the early 00s to try to get people to do advocacy because this was an underrepresented, still is underrepresented population. And, we are intimidated by the idea of advocacy, but what you said is exactly right. Anybody can find something they can do. Anybody can find something within our own comfort zone. Thank you.
One experience that I think's really been helpful is the recovery specialist movement in Illinois. Allowing people who've gone through recovery because of their lived experience are now helping others.
Yes.
And they're finding out it's so much more beneficial to clients coming in, maintaining their connection and recovery. And it's also helping the people who are helping the people. So it's really been kind of a universal experience. So I think that's been a huge movement to reduce stigma within our communities.
I agree. Yes.
I absolutely love that Illinois has been able to do so. I've within Johnson County, I've lived here for about 15 years now, and I walked in Arrowleaf, and the lady, they just got the grant a few days beforehand, and I got the job before it even got put out for the peer recovery specialist. And it was like years of blessings and prayers and everything instantly, like in my lap. And it was just so, it was wonderful and it was so exciting. And to be able to watch like Ross Council's open, like we've opened 3 and we've got them established. This will be our 4th month with them, going in our 5th month, and getting our councils going and getting smart recovery started and having no resources whatsoever in our area. Not remotely, you know, maybe 45 minutes to an hour away, but there's still, that depends if something's open, available, and meetings and stuff. But it's just, it's wonderful to watch everything start to grow the way that it has been, because there is more understanding in more ways than just overlooking it and, oh, this is a problem, I don't want nothing to do with it. It's more like, hey, we've got to help or else it's not going to help us. And honestly, it might be a selfish way of somebody else looking at it, but still, it's still helping those in recovery, those recovered, and those still in active addiction. And I think it's a wonderful thing, no matter which way somebody's heart is starting it. You know, I love it, and I'm very thankful. The whole peer recovery specialist is, I love it. You know, it's wonderful. It really is. And I don't want to do anything else in my entire life. I don't, never. Like that's it.
You know, Pam, in response to what Haley said, after being in the field for 40 some years, what I see is the navigator, you know, recovery navigators, recovery specialists, those kinds of things. They're sharing the stories that we need shared to start addressing the stigma and shame. And they do it with such style and dedication that it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And from your comment, it sounds like you're living your dream.
Haley, yeah.
Isn't that the thing that everybody wants to do? But
It might not be my dream, as that's not what I envisioned whenever I was a child, but it is absolutely every bit of my prayer in every way, because I did not think that I would make it to much else 31, you know, and have 2 babies and things go the way that they are. I mean, the world's so crazy right now, and it's not going to get any better, but thankfully this world is not our home. But it is a dream come true in every way possible. I've got the best people that I work with. I could not ask for a better team, and it's 3 of us right now, and it don't even have to be work related in any way possible, and no matter what, it's just I'm very thankful. And the Lord puts everything together for a reason at the right times, and they take some years. You know, you just never know, but it absolutely is, and I couldn't be more thankful.
I'm doing a time check-in. We got 12 minutes.
Oh my
okay.
gosh.
And this is the most important discussion. I will any more thoughts before I go on to the next thing, which is a fairly short thing. And I'm going to invite you, I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to invite you to to contribute while we're doing it, because I just was going to talk about the 3 approaches and what the research says about what is effective against stigma, and it's very much exactly what you guys are talking about. There's the research has studied 3 approaches, like public education, what you might call activism and protest, and repeated direct contact and conversation. So public education would be like health education, awareness raising, basically explaining things, right? What I do a lot of in writing is I'm an introvert. And so, you know, when I started thinking I can't do advocacy, well, I can write a manual. I know how to write a manual. That's, you know, the rest of it might be terrifying to me. Activism and protest. The third one, basically what the recovery specialists are doing, which is becoming someone people can be exposed to. You know, this is over time. So what the research found was that public education is absolutely necessary, but it's not the most effective at changing hearts and minds, because again, that that old higher mind, which thinks that it's in charge, may be very interested in public education, but the survival brain doesn't have much interest in that. And the idea that I can somehow keep myself safe by stigmatizing you is going to be more powerful than some abstract thing about the receptors and the, you know, what happens with the chemicals in the brain. Activism and protest, they found that that had mixed results. Like if there's a specific discriminatory policy, you know, and the powers that be can pass a law or repeal something or do some kind of other concrete action to make things better, then activism and protest can make a difference. Like end mandatory minimums, right? Fund treatment and recovery support. Our community needs a mental health drop-in center, or, you know, when there's a mental health crisis, please send in a mental health team instead of a SWAT team. If somebody's like losing it. So the research says that protest works really well with a specific policy or a specific practice that needs to be changed, but it doesn't work very well in changing hearts and minds. And, you know, because there's no concrete action that can make things better. But you also, you know, sometimes people, when they are doing activism and protest, will get out there and they will like, here's my passion, here's my anger, here's how frustrated I am with the way you have been doing things. And if my main objective is to convince you that I am just like you, I am healthy, I am well, I am safe for you to be around, and I'm out there screaming and yelling and looking really angry, that's going to be a mixed message. And so sometimes activism and protest can work against the psychological part of stigma, unless it's aimed at a particular thing, like we will stop doing this if you will change this law. And the research tends to favor the third option: human contact and connection, going out there, talking about your lives, talking about substance use disorders, talking about resources, talking about recovery, normalizing things, you know, being clearly trustworthy and pleasant people who are embodying this message. So repeated direct contact and conversation tends to be the one that the research favors most. I'd like to take the screen off, stop sharing, and we just have like 6 minutes. If anybody has any final thoughts that they'd like to contribute, obviously any questions. There was a lot of the subject that we can't address in an hour and a half, but things that you've thought of that you'd like to say to the group, anything. And again, don't need to raise your hands or anything, just talk. But
I'd
unmute
just like to
yourself.
say thank you for raising awareness about this and for getting us to look at ourselves. And it's always good to be reminded. So greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank everybody for sharing. I know it takes a lot sometimes for everybody to share, but I appreciate everybody sharing.
I do too. It's, we go on webinars for a little rest where we can just kind of listen, but at the same time, we can maybe fix our emails and stuff like that. And you've been involved, you've been speaking from the heart, and you've been sharing really important, wise insights. Who else? Any thoughts? What are you going to do? Anybody have any things that they are going to do that they hadn't thought of doing before this, that you might want to do or try?
I think there is so much that it's almost impossible to just pick one thing, because like my supervisor tells me, slow down and breathe. And because there is so many things that are a possibility. But I think being able to get out and reach people in the jails and in the rehabs and show them that there is support with our community, and make connections with our officers in the counties to help them as well to make that connection. So maybe people don't feel like they're against them as much as informing them in ways so that way they know that everybody's a team and we can all work together. And that in the end is the biggest accomplishment I think any of it could make. Just know that everybody has everybody else's back. And if you don't, you can kind of stand over that away and watch everybody until you can pitch along, but if everybody can't synchronize together, then it's difficult, but that's what we got to work towards.
Beautiful.
I think I always remind everybody that when they feel like this stigmatized, I always remind them that there are reasons why agencies are here. It's because there's a need. It's not just because of them. There is a big need, and that is why different agencies are funded. And they're not out there alone. It's not just anything to do with them personally. It's a big need because there's a big problem.
A big problem that adds to a lot of other big problems.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're all from different agencies that deal with different aspects of life.
Yeah.
But everything affects each one of us. And that's why we're all here.
Yes.
And I'd like to add, just to keep showing up because of today. Thank you, Nancy, for remembering us to come. And thank you, Pamela, for such a phenomenal reminder of healing the stigma. And because of today, I have connected with Haley, and I'm going to connect with her further to bring more awareness. So I think showing up makes a world of difference. You never know what connections might be made and what opportunities will open doors for the voices to be heard, not just from generations, I'm 53 and up, but just from the younger generations. I think that speaks volumes to what's definitely needed today. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I really do appreciate this today as well. Like she said, that I've never been asked to do anything like that, but that's the second person who's asked me today, and that's a blessing and that's exciting. So I really appreciate it. And both of them, I've got y'all already email typed out, so I can send them to y'all. Because that's so sweet of y'all. It really is. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate y'all's time today for putting in everything that y'all do. So you can tell how much y'all care.
Now you know why I wanted Pam to do this. She's just so good at this.
We y'all
Yeah.
both connect
Go ahead.
together like that. Y'all's togetherness shows how much y'all truly care.
May I ask, is there anything we need to do to get our certificates for this? I have a client here in just a moment.
Okay, I was just getting ready to kind of close it up where it is 11:30 and it's time to sign off. As I close, the survey will pop up. I would really appreciate you taking the time. That's how we keep our funding coming, is good surveys, to do this. And next, it'll probably be Monday because I'm going to be traveling the rest of the week. It's a statewide program and I'm back on the road. Monday, I will be sending out certificates and probably some other resources that I'll link onto that, so you will get those. I'm excited by this. I see people that I've worked with in different areas. I see new names. I hear things that really excite me, as I know that one of these days I'm going to be moving out of the field and doing grandma things, I guess. But not that there's a thing wrong with that. I really appreciate what you've shared today, and I so appreciate what you're doing out in the field as we see this shift and this change of addressing stigma and shame and being able to share the successes. So Pam, if you have anything to wrap up, I'll give it to you to say goodbye, and then I'm going to say you will hear from me within the week. And thank you.
All I can add is that that you have left me heartened. You have left me very much heartened. If this is what's going on in the field, we are lucky and we are blessed and we have some hope.
Thank you, Pamela and Nancy.
Thank you.